I watched in disbelief as my aunt slid another serving spoon into my hand, patting my shoulder with that familiar, condescending smile. "Since you don't have a husband or children to look after, you can manage the buffet table, right, dear?" The family reunion was in full swing at Willowbrook Resort, with my cousins lounging by the pool and my uncle bragging about his new yacht. Nobody noticed when I stepped away to take a call from my investment banker, confirming my purchase of the entire property. If only they knew that the unmarried disappointment they'd relegated to kitchen duty was about to become their landlord. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The annual Blackwood family reunion had always been a masterclass in subtle humiliation. This year was no different, except perhaps for the scale of it all. I pulled my car into the circular driveway of Willowbrook Resort, a sprawling estate nestled in the Catskill Mountains. My cousin Natalie's latest Instagram post had already garnered hundreds of likes, a perfect family portrait with everyone by the lake. Everyone except me, of course. The invitation had arrived suspiciously late this year, just 3 weeks before the event. "So sorry for the delay, Morgan. It must have gotten lost in the mail," my Aunt Vivian had claimed, though we both knew better. As I retrieved my suitcase from the trunk, I noticed my Uncle Theodore's gleaming Bentley parked prominently near the entrance. Next to it was my cousin Blake's Tesla, and beside that, my other cousin Natalie's Range Rover. My modest Subaru, while practical for my frequent business trips into remote areas, looked painfully out of place. Not that I couldn't afford better. My investment portfolio had quietly outperformed everyone else's in the family for years, but I'd never seen the point in flaunting wealth the way the rest of the Blackwoods did. The resort lobby was a flurry of activity. My mother's side of the family had taken over the entire east wing of the property. Something Uncle Theodore proudly announced was a special arrangement with management. I approached the check-in desk, where the receptionist smiled brightly. "Welcome to Willowbrook Resort. How may I help you?" "Morgan Blackwood. I should have a reservation." Her fingers clacked against the keyboard. "I'm sorry, Ms. Blackwood. I'm not seeing your name on the list for the Blackwood family block." A familiar voice called out behind me. "Morgan, you made it after all." Aunt Vivian approached, her silk caftan floating around her like expensive clouds. "There's been a tiny mix-up with the rooms. We didn't think you'd be able to attend, so we didn't reserve you a suite in the family wing." I raised an eyebrow. The invitation said to RSVP by the 15th. I replied on the 12th. "Did you? I must have missed it." She waved a hand dismissively. "No matter. We've arranged for you to stay in the staff quarters. It's quite comfortable, I'm told, and convenient since you'll be helping with serving duties tomorrow." The receptionist looked mortified on my behalf, but I kept my expression neutral. I'd perfected that skill through decades of Blackwood family dynamics. "Serving duties?" I asked, my voice carefully measured. "Well, someone needs to oversee the buffet, and since you don't have a husband or children to look after." Vivian trailed off, the implication clear. At 38, my unmarried, childless status was considered the ultimate failure in Blackwood circles, despite my MBA, my thriving consultancy business, and the investment portfolio that had recently allowed me to make the most significant purchase of my life. "I see," I said. "And everyone else already has assignments?" "Your cousin Blake is handling the boat tours. He's so good with people, you know. Natalie is organizing the children's activities. She has such a natural maternal instinct." Vivian beamed with pride over her daughter's ability to corral children for an hour while scrolling through her phone. "And Theodore, of course, is managing the finances and arrangements with the resort staff." I nodded, absorbing the familiar hierarchy. My Uncle Theodore, my mother's older brother, had appointed himself family patriarch after my grandfather passed away. It didn't seem to matter that my mother had been the one who'd actually built a successful business before her death 10 years ago. a business that Theodore had promptly mismanaged into near bankruptcy before I quietly stepped in to save it without taking credit. "The staff quarters will be fine," I said finally, "and I'm happy to help tomorrow." Vivian looked relieved, probably having expected more resistance. "Wonderful. The family meeting is at 7 in the main dining room. Don't be late. Theodore has some exciting news." As she floated away, the receptionist gave me an apologetic look. "I can try to find you a regular room, Ms. Blackwood. This doesn't seem right." I smiled at her, genuinely this time. "That's very kind. But the staff quarters will be perfect, actually. I'd like to get a behind-the-scenes look at this place." She seemed confused but handed me a key card. "Second floor, East Corridor. It's basic but clean." "Thank you." I took the card and my suitcase, making my way through the opulent lobby toward the staff area. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Eleanor, my financial advisor. "Morgan, everything is proceeding as planned. The current owners have accepted your offer. You'll be the official owner of Willowbrook Resort by noon tomorrow. We just need your final signature on the documents I emailed." I stopped in a quiet corridor, taking in the news. "That's perfect timing, Eleanor. I'll sign everything tonight." "Are you sure you don't want the current management to announce the change in ownership? It's unusual for the new owner to be present incognito during the transition." I watched as my cousin's children ran through the lobby, their nanny chasing after them while my cousin Natalie sipped champagne by the fireplace, ostensibly supervising them. "I'm absolutely sure," I replied. "For once, I want to see their genuine reactions, not the performances they put on when they think I'm watching." After hanging up, I continued toward the staff quarters, a strange sense of calm settling over me. For 15 years since my mother's death, I'd been the family afterthought, useful when they needed my business expertise or a last-minute babysitter, invisible when accolades and recognition were being distributed. Tomorrow, everything will change. Not because I craved power over them, but because I was finally ready to stop pretending I was less than I was to make others comfortable. The Blackwood family reunion was about to become very interesting indeed. As I unpacked my simple weekend bag in the modest staff room, I reflected on how I'd reached this point. My mother had been the only one who ever saw my potential, who encouraged my interest in business and investment, while the rest of the family dismissed it as unfeminine. After she died unexpectedly of an aneurysm, I'd honored her faith in me by quietly building something substantial, even as my family continued to treat me as the unsuccessful spinster cousin. Little did they know that tomorrow, the help would become the owner, and years of dismissal would finally come to an end. The staff quarters were Spartan but clean, a twin bed with crisp white linens, a small desk, and a window overlooking the service entrance. It was a far cry from the luxury suites my relatives were enjoying, but there was something refreshing about its honesty. No pretense, no excessive ornamentation, just functionality. I changed into a simple black dress for the family meeting, deliberately understated compared to the cocktail attire I knew the others would wear. My cousin Natalie had once commented that I dressed like someone who had given up, not realizing that my wardrobe choices were strategic. In the business world, I'd learned that being underestimated often provided tactical advantages. As I made my way to the main dining room, I passed a housekeeping cart. A middle-aged woman with kind eyes was restocking towels. "Excuse me?" I said. "Could you tell me a bit about working at Willowbrook?" She seemed surprised by the question but offered a tired smile. "Been here 15 years, miss. It's steady work, though the hours can be long during peak season." "And the management? How are they to work for?" She glanced around before answering. "The current owners are rarely here. It's mostly the general manager, Mr. Harrington. He's fair enough, but this place could use some improvements in how staff are treated." She studied me curiously. "You new? Don't think I've seen you before." "Just curious about the operations," I replied. "Thank you for your insight." The information confirmed what my due diligence had already revealed. Willowbrook was profitable but neglected, with absentee owners who viewed it merely as an investment, rather than a business with real people at its heart. That will be changing soon. The main dining room was a cathedral to excess, with crystal chandeliers reflecting off polished marble floors. Most of the family had already arrived, champagne flutes in hand, dressed in what they considered casual evening wear, which still involved designer labels and jewelry that could fund a small business. Uncle Theodore held court at the center of the room, his booming voice carrying over the conversations. Blake's portfolio is up 17% this quarter. The boy has a gift, just like his old man. Blake, my 35-year-old cousin who still referred to himself as a boy with potential, beamed under the praise. What Theodore failed to mention was that Blake's gift included a trust fund and connections that had secured him a position at his father's firm straight out of college. I slipped into the room quietly, but not quietly enough. "Morgan, there. You are!" Aunt Vivian's voice cut through the chatter. "We were beginning to think you'd gotten lost." Conversations paused as heads turned in my direction. I felt the familiar assessment in their gazes, taking in my simple dress, my lack of expensive accessories, the absence of a +1 at my side. "The staff quarters are on the other side of the property," I explained, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing server with a grateful smile. Staff quarters. My cousin Natalie's perfectly shaped eyebrows shot up in feigned concern. "Vivi, you didn't put Morgan in the staff wing, did you? That's awful." "It was a last-minute arrangement," Vivian replied, shooting me a look that dared me to contradict her. "Morgan doesn't mind, do you, dear? You've always been so accommodating." The way she said accommodating made it sound like a character flaw rather than a virtue. Before I could respond, Uncle Theodore called for everyone's attention by tapping his knife against his crystal glass. "Family, family, gather round. I have an exciting announcement." The Blackwoods assembled in a loose semicircle around Theodore, who stood with the pompous gravity of a small-town mayor about to unveil a mediocre statue. "As you know, this is our 5th year holding the family reunion at Willowbrook Resort. What you may not know is that I've been in discussions with the ownership about possibly investing in this fine establishment." My heart skipped a beat. This was unexpected. "The resort has been underperforming financially," Theodore continued, "and the current owners are looking for investors to inject some capital. I've put together a family investment opportunity. For those interested, buy-in starts at $50,000. Murmurs of excitement rippled through the group. My cousin Blake was already pulling out his phone, presumably to check his accounts. "Think of it," Theodore went on, warming to his subject. "Family vacations at our own resort. Profit sharing. A legacy property for the Blackwood name." I sipped my champagne, watching the scene unfold with a mixture of amusement and disbelief. Theodore had no idea that the discussions he'd been having were merely courtesy meetings. The real negotiations had been happening with me, through layers of LLCs and legal representatives to maintain my privacy. "What's the projected return?" asked my cousin-in-law Derek, who fancied himself a financial whiz despite having lost a small fortune in cryptocurrency the previous year. "Conservatively, 8% annually," Theodore replied with unearned confidence. "But with my business acumen and connections, I believe we could push that to 12 or even 15%. I nearly choked on my champagne. Those numbers were pure fantasy based on the resort's current operations model. "Morgan, you're in business consulting, aren't you?" Blake's wife, Stephanie, turned to me with the vague interest people show when they suddenly remember you exist. "What do you think of Uncle Theo's investment opportunity?" The room grew quiet. It was rare for anyone to solicit my opinion on financial matters, despite my actual expertise. "It's an interesting proposition," I said carefully. "Though I'd want to see the full due diligence report before making any decisions. Resort properties can be complex investments." Theodore waved a dismissive hand. Always the cautious one, Morgan. That's why you're still consulting while the rest of us are building real wealth. Sometimes you have to take risks to get rewards. The familiar sting of his dismissal was dulled by the knowledge of what would unfold tomorrow. Let him have this moment, I thought. It wouldn't last long. Speaking of consulting, Aunt Vivian interjected, clearly uncomfortable with even this brief focus on me. Has everyone confirmed their duties for tomorrow's festivities? Morgan, dear, you'll report to the kitchen staff at 7 a.m. to help coordinate the breakfast buffet. And just like that, I was relegated back to the role they were comfortable seeing me in. The helpful spinster cousin who could be counted on for practical tasks while the important family members enjoyed themselves. Of course, I agreed mildly. I'll be there. As the conversation moved on to other topics, I drifted toward the edge of the room. My phone vibrated in my pocket, a text from Eleanor. Final contracts ready for your electronic signature. Congratulations on your new acquisition. I glanced up at my family, all caught up in Theodore's investment fantasy, none of them having the slightest inkling that by this time tomorrow, they would be guests at my resort. I stepped out onto the terrace, breathing in the cool evening air, and opened the contract on my phone. With one digital signature, I finalized the purchase of Willowbrook Resort and its sprawling grounds for $28 million, a fair price for a property with untapped potential, and a bargain for the look on Theodore's face when he found out. As I pressed sign, I felt no triumph, no vindictive glee, only a quiet resolve. Tomorrow would change everything, not because I wanted to lord my success over my family, but because it was finally time for them to see me clearly. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The staff alarm clock jolted me awake at 5:30 a.m. For a moment, I forgot where I was, the utilitarian room a stark contrast to my carefully designed bedroom at home. Reality quickly returned as I heard the sounds of the resort's morning staff beginning their day, hustling down the hallway with their efficient, purposeful footsteps. I showered in the small bathroom, using the basic toiletries provided for staff rather than the luxury products guests received. There was something grounding about this experience, a reminder of what real work looked like behind the polished facade that my family so admired. By 6:45 a.m., I was making my way to the kitchen, dressed in black slacks and a white button-down. I'd packed for the family photo that would inevitably exclude me anyway. The resort was quiet, most guests, including my relatives, still asleep in their plush beds. The kitchen, however, was alive with activity. Cooks prepared breakfast offerings, servers arranged silverware and napkins, and in the center of it all stood a stocky man with salt and pepper hair, who I recognized from my research as Eduardo Vega, the head chef for the past 20 years. "Excuse me," I said, approaching him. "I'm Morgan Blackwood. I believe I've been assigned to help with the breakfast buffet." Chef Vega looked up from the clipboard he was reviewing, surprise evident on his face. "You're with the Blackwood party, yes? The guests who've taken over the East Wing?" "That's right," he frowned. "We don't usually have guests working in the kitchen, Ms. Blackwood. There must be some confusion." "No confusion," I assured him. "My family volunteered my services. Apparently, since I don't have a husband or children to care for, I'm the logical choice to oversee the buffet." Something shifted in his expression. Recognition, perhaps, of the family dynamics at play. He'd likely seen similar situations unfold during his years of catering to wealthy families. "I see." He nodded slowly. "Well, if you're here to help, I won't turn you away. We're short-staffed this weekend anyway." He gestured toward a young woman arranging fruit on platters. "Lucia can show you what needs to be done." Lucia, who couldn't have been more than 20, regarded me with thinly veiled suspicion as Chef Vega made the introduction. "You're really here to work? Not to complain about the temperature of the croissants or something?" I laughed, genuinely. amused by her directness. I'm really here to work. My family thinks it's my proper place. She assessed me for a moment, then handed me an apron. All right then, you can start by arranging these pastries on the display trays. Croissants at the back, danishes in the middle, muffins at the front. For the next hour, I worked alongside Lucia and the other staff, arranging food, refilling coffee urns, and preparing the dining room for the breakfast service. The work was straightforward but demanding, requiring attention to detail and a sense of urgency I recognized from my own business endeavors. As we worked, Lucia gradually warmed to me. So what's your deal anyway? Why does your family think you should be serving them breakfast? I carefully positioned a chocolate croissant on the display. I'm the unmarried, childless one. In their eyes, that makes me less complete. Available for tasks nobody else wants. She snorted. That's messed up. What do you do in real life? When you're not Cinderella to your family? I run a business consultancy, I said, simplifying my portfolio of ventures. I help companies identify inefficiencies and implement solutions. Like this place? She gestured around the kitchen. Because let me tell you, there's plenty to fix. Equipment from the Stone Age, scheduling software that crashes every other day. I listened as she detailed the operational issues plaguing the resort, problems I was already aware of from my due diligence, but hearing them from a frontline employee added valuable perspective. Mental notes accumulated as Lucia spoke, potential improvements I could implement once the ownership transition was complete. At 8 a.m., the breakfast service began. I positioned myself at the main buffet station, ready to assist guests and keep everything replenished. The first wave of diners didn't include any of my family members. They rarely rose before 9:30, considering early mornings beneath them. As I refilled the fruit platter, a memory surfaced unbidden. My mother, the only Blackwood who'd ever truly supported me, standing in our kitchen teaching me to make her special cinnamon rolls. Pay attention to details, Morgan, she'd said, showing me how to roll the dough with precision. In business and in life, it's the small things that separate good from exceptional. My mother had built her interior design firm from nothing, turning it into a multi-million-dollar enterprise through talent and sheer determination. When she died suddenly 10 years ago, Uncle Theodore had swooped in, convincing me that at 28, I was too inexperienced to take over. Let me handle the business concerns, he'd insisted. You focus on grieving. By the time I realized he was systematically dismantling everything she'd built, replacing her innovative designs with mass-market offerings, cutting quality to increase short-term profits, the damage was severe. I'd stepped in quietly, using the inheritance she'd left me to buy controlling interest through a shell corporation, then gradually rebuilding what Theodore had nearly destroyed. He still believed he was the company chairman, unaware that his position was merely ceremonial. His worst impulses checked by board decisions that actually came from me. Earth to Morgan, Lucia's voice pulled me from my memories. Your family's arrived, table by the windows. I looked up to see Aunt Vivian, Uncle Theodore, and several cousins settling at a large table overlooking the lake. They appeared fresh and rested, laughing as they perused the menu for made-to-order items, completely ignoring the buffet I'd helped prepare. Aren't you going to say hello? Lucia asked. They haven't noticed me yet, I replied. And they won't unless they need something. As if on cue, Aunt Vivian's gaze swept the room, landing on me. She raised a perfectly manicured hand, beckoning imperiously. I wiped my hands on my apron and approached their table. Morgan, there you are. Vivian smiled her society smile. All teeth, no warmth. We need more napkins, and Blake would like fresh squeezed orange juice, not whatever is in the pitcher. Not a good morning, not a thank you for helping with breakfast, just immediate demands. I felt Lucia watching from across the room, witnessing the dynamic firsthand. Of course, I said evenly. Anything else? Yes, Theodore interjected, not looking up from his phone. Find out if the kitchen can prepare eggs Benedict for the table. It's not on the menu, but surely they can accommodate a special request for preferred guests. I'll check with Chef. Vega? I replied, my professional mask firmly in place. As I turned to leave, my cousin Natalie called after me. Oh, and Morgan? When you're done with the breakfast shift, we need someone to organize the children's scavenger hunt. The activities coordinator called in sick. I paused, looking back at the table of relatives who saw me only as a convenient resource. I thought, that was your assignment, Natalie. She waved a dismissive hand. I have a spa appointment at 11. You don't mind, do you? It's not like you have other plans. In just a few hours, I would be revealed as the new owner of this entire resort, with the power to drastically change their experience here. Yet in this moment, they still saw me as nothing more than the family errand girl. I'll see what I can do, I said, walking away with the knowledge that very soon, everything would change. After breakfast service ended, I retreated to the staff break room for a much-needed cup of coffee. My hands smelled of maple syrup and cleaning solution, an honest day's work before most of my relatives had even properly started their morning. Through the small window, I could see guests gathering. On the lawn for various activities, my cousin Blake was preparing to lead the promised boat tours, though preparing seemed to consist mainly of posing for photos that his wife would undoubtedly post with some caption about entrepreneurial leadership. You survived breakfast. Duty, Lucia observed, dropping into the chair across from me, and handled your family like a pro. Years of practice, I replied, sipping the surprisingly decent staff coffee. So what's next on your servant schedule? Let me guess. Hand feeding them grapes while they lounge by the pool? I smiled despite my exhaustion. Children's scavenger hunt, apparently. My cousin had a spa emergency. Lucia rolled her eyes. Of course she did. She hesitated, then added, You know, you don't have to take their crap. You could just not do it. The simplicity of her statement struck me. Yes, I could just not do it. I had spent so many years accommodating my family's demands, finding it easier to comply than to deal with the drama of refusal. Even now, on the verge of a power shift they couldn't imagine, I was still following their directives. You're right, I said finally. I don't have to do any of it. That's the spirit. Lucia grinned. Small rebellions keep you sane. That's how I survived this place. Our conversation was interrupted by the break room door swinging open. A tall man in a tailored suit entered, his presence immediately commanding attention. I recognized him as James Harrington, the general manager whose name had appeared frequently in the acquisition documents. Lucia, your break ended 5 minutes ago, he said, his tone clipped. On my way, Mr. Harrington. Lucia stood, shooting me a subtle eye roll before heading back to work. Harrington turned his attention to me, his expression shifting from stern to professionally accommodating as he registered I wasn't staff. You must be with the Blackwood party. I'm James Harrington, general manager of Willowbrook. Is there something I can help you with? This area is typically reserved for employees. I rose, extending my hand. Morgan Blackwood. I was helping with the breakfast service at my family's request. He shook my hand, confusion evident in his eyes. I see. That's rather unusual. If there was an issue with our service— No issue at all, I assured him. My family simply has creative ideas about how I should spend my time here. Understanding dawned in his expression, the same recognition I'd seen in Chef Vega's eyes. Working in hospitality, especially at high-end resorts, meant witnessing the often dysfunctional dynamics of wealthy families. Well, Ms. Blackwood, while we appreciate the assistance, there's no need for guests to work during their stay. Perhaps I could speak with the head of your party to clear up this misunderstanding? I almost laughed at the thought of Harrington confronting Uncle Theodore about putting me to work. That's a kind offer, but unnecessary. I actually found the morning quite illuminating. He studied me more carefully now, perhaps sensing there was more to the situation than a simple family quirk. In that case, is there anything I can do to make the remainder of your stay more enjoyable? I understand you've been placed in the staff quarters, which is highly irregular. I could arrange for a proper guest room immediately. This man had no idea he would be reporting to me within hours. I found myself curious about his management style, his vision for the resort, and whether he would be an asset worth retaining after the ownership change. Actually, Mr. Harrington, I'd love to hear your thoughts on Willowbrook. If you have a few minutes? He checked his watch, then gestured to the chair I'd vacated. I can spare 10 minutes before my next meeting. As we sat, I carefully structured my questions to sound like casual interest rather than the due diligence they actually were. How long have you been managing this property? 7 years, he replied. I came from the Ritz-Carlton Group before that. And if you owned this place, what would you change? I asked, watching his reaction closely. Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise at the direct question, perhaps, or recognition of an opportunity to voice thoughts he normally kept private. That's an interesting hypothetical, he said cautiously. Willowbrook has tremendous potential, but it's been hampered by underinvestment. The current owners are more concerned with short-term profit margins than long-term vision. I nodded encouragingly. What kind of vision do you think would serve this property better? The professional reserve cracked slightly as passion seeped into his voice. Willowbrook could be the premier destination in this region. We need updated. Amenities, certainly, but also a coherent identity. Are we a family resort, a wellness retreat, a corporate conference center? We try to be everything to everyone, which results in being exceptional at nothing. His assessment aligned perfectly with my own analysis. And the staff? I've noticed some operational inefficiencies. They're underpaid and overworked, he said bluntly, then seemed to catch himself. But they're dedicated professionals who deliver excellent service despite challenging conditions. I decided to push a little further. What would you prioritize? If you suddenly had a significant capital investment to work with? He leaned forward, warming to the topic. Staff retention would be first. Better wages, improved housing, comprehensive training. Then technology upgrades throughout the property. The booking system alone is ancient. Finally, a renovation of the West Wing to create a true luxury tier of accommodations. All items that were already on my post-acquisition plan. James Harrington was proving himself to be more insightful than I had anticipated. You've clearly given this some thought, I observed. He straightened, professionalism snapping back into place. It's my job to think about these things, even if implementation decisions are above my pay grade. He checked his watch again. I should get to my meeting. It was a pleasure speaking with you, Ms. Blackwood. As he stood to leave, I made a split-second decision. Mr. Harrington, I'm curious about something. My uncle mentioned he's been in talks about investing in Willowbrook. What can you tell me about that? His expression remained carefully neutral, but I caught the subtle tightening around his eyes. I'm afraid I can't discuss business matters involving the resort with guests, Ms. Blackwood. But if your uncle has questions, he's welcome to direct them to our ownership group through the proper channels. The diplomatic non-answer told me everything I needed to know. Theodore had likely made some inquiries but had gotten nowhere near an actual investment opportunity. Of course. Thank you for your time. After he left, I remained in the break room, contemplating our conversation. James Harrington was intelligent, perceptive, and genuinely cared about Willowbrook's potential. He might be worth keeping on through the transition. Someone who knew the operation inside out, but wasn't afraid to envision necessary changes. My phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. Ownership transfer complete. Paperwork filed. Congratulations, you now own Willowbrook Resort. When would you like to make the announcement? I typed back quickly. Arrange for the announcement at 2 p.m. in the main lobby. I'll handle it personally. 3 hours. In 3 hours. The power dynamic that had defined my relationship with my family for decades would be irreversibly altered, not out of vengeance, but necessity. Some patterns could only be broken with dramatic disruption. I left the break room and headed toward the Children's Activity Center. I had a scavenger hunt to organize before my world changed forever. The Children's Activity Center was a cheerful space filled with primary colors and craft supplies. 8 of my cousins' children, ranging in age from 4 to 12, were already there, their faces displaying varying degrees of boredom and impatience. The youngest, my cousin Blake's daughter Emma, brightened when she saw me. "Aunt Morgan," she called, running over to hug my legs. "Are you doing the treasure hunt with us? Mommy said you would." I felt a pang of affection for Emma, who at 4 years old hadn't yet absorbed the family's dismissive attitude toward me. "That's the plan," I confirmed, bending down to her level. "But first, I need you all to help me create the clues." This unconventional approach was met with immediate interest from the children, who were delighted to be co-conspirators rather than just participants. For the next hour, we crafted riddles and drew maps, creating a scavenger hunt that would lead them around the safer areas of the resort grounds. As we worked, 12-year-old Tyler, Natalie's oldest, looked at me curiously. "Mom says you don't have a real job. Is that true?" The bluntness of children never failed to surprise me. "What do you think a real job is, Tyler?" He shrugged. "Dad goes to an office and makes lots of money. Mom says you just help people with stuff." "I do help people with stuff," I acknowledged. "I help businesses figure out how to work better, and sometimes I invest in companies that I think have potential." "Do you make money?" he pressed, with a child's directness. I smiled. "Yes, I do." "Then why does Mom say you're not successful?" Out of the mouths of babes. I chose my words carefully, aware of the other children listening. Sometimes adults have different ideas about what success looks like. Your mom and I have different definitions. Tyler seemed to consider this seriously. "I think if you make money and you're not mean, that's successful." I laughed. "That's a pretty good definition, Tyler." Our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Aunt Vivian, who swept into the activity center in her designer resort wear, sunglasses perched on her head despite being indoors. "Morgan, there you are. Theodore has been looking everywhere for you." I glanced at my watch. It was nearly noon, 2 hours before my scheduled announcement. "I've been right here, organizing the scavenger hunt as requested." Vivian waved a dismissive hand. "Well, you need to find him immediately. He's by the pool. Something about the investment opportunity. Apparently there's been a development." My heart quickened. Had Theodore somehow gotten wind of the ownership transfer? That seemed impossible. I'd been meticulously careful with the confidentiality agreements. "I'll find him after we finish the scavenger hunt," I replied, gesturing to the children who were still working on their clues. Vivian's expression hardened. "Morgan, this is an important family business. Surely these activities can wait." I felt something shift inside me, a tectonic plate of patience finally giving way after years of pressure. "Actually, Vivian, I promised the children I'd help. Them. That's a commitment I intend to honor." She blinked, clearly unprepared for resistance. "I don't think you understand. Theodore says it's urgent." "What I understand," I said evenly, "is that I was assigned this task because my time was deemed less valuable than Natalie's spa appointment. Now that it suits the family for me to be elsewhere, suddenly the children's entertainment is unimportant." The children had gone quiet, sensing the tension between adults. Emma slipped her small hand into mine in a gesture of solidarity that nearly broke my composure. Vivian lowered her voice to a harsh whisper. "This is exactly why you're always on the outside, Morgan. You make everything so difficult when we're just trying to include you in family matters." The irony of her statement, claiming they were trying to include me while simultaneously treating me as disposable, crystallized everything that was wrong with our family dynamic. "I'll find Theodore after the scavenger hunt," I repeated, my voice calm but firm. "The children have been waiting patiently, and they deserve the activity they were promised." Vivian's face flushed with anger. "Fine. Have it your way. But don't complain later when you're excluded from important family decisions." She turned on her heel and stalked out, leaving a wake of expensive perfume and indignation. Tyler whistled low. "Wow, Aunt Morgan, you stood up to her." I realized all the children were staring at me with something like awe. It occurred to me that they probably rarely witnessed adults in their family standing firm against Vivian's imperious demands. "Sometimes," I told them, "it's important to keep your promises, even when it would be easier not to." We finished creating the scavenger hunt, and I spent the next hour guiding the children through the resort as they solved riddles and followed clues to hidden treasures, small toys and candy I'd quickly purchased from the gift shop. Their excitement and genuine enjoyment were a refreshing contrast to the calculated social performances of their parents. As we concluded the activity, the children dispersed to their respective parents who were lounging by the pool. I spotted Uncle Theodore in deep conversation with several other family members, gesturing emphatically about something. When he saw me, he beckoned urgently. For a moment, I considered ignoring him as I had Vivian, but curiosity won out. I approached the group, noting the unusual level of agitation. "Morgan, finally," Theodore huffed. "Where have you been? I've been trying to reach you all morning." "I was running the children's scavenger hunt," I replied. "As assigned," he dismissed, this with an impatient wave. "Never mind that. We have a situation with the investment opportunity." "What situation?" I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. Theodore lowered his voice dramatically. "I've just been informed that someone else has purchased Willowbrook, right out from under us. After all the discussions I've had with management, some outsider swooped in and bought the entire property." I maintained a neutral expression with effort. "That's unfortunate." "Unfortunate?" Theodore sputtered. "It's outrageous. It's underhanded." I had a verbal understanding with the ownership group that we would have first right of consideration. This was news to me, and almost certainly a fabrication born of Theodore's inflated sense of his own importance. The sellers had never mentioned any such arrangement during our negotiations. "Perhaps there was a miscommunication," I suggested mildly. "There was no miscommunication," he insisted. "This was corporate espionage, plain and simple. Someone must have gotten wind of our interest and deliberately interfered." My cousin Blake, his father's son, nodded vigorously. "We should consult with our attorneys. There could be grounds for a lawsuit." The absurdity of the situation, them plotting litigation against me without knowing it, was almost too much to bear. I checked my watch. 1:15 p.m. 45 minutes. Until the announcement. "When did this happen?" I asked, curious about how the information had reached them. "The sale was finalized this morning," Theodore said grimly. "Harrington told me himself, though he claims not to know who the buyer is. Said they used some anonymous LLC to hide their identity. So Harrington had maintained confidentiality. Good. To know." "And what does this mean for the reunion?" I asked, playing my role as the practical one. "Nothing changes for this weekend," Theodore said. "But I've called an emergency family meeting at 2 p.m. to discuss our options. This could have been a significant opportunity for the Blackwood portfolio." 2 p.m., the exact time scheduled for the ownership announcement. The cosmic timing couldn't have been more perfect if I'd orchestrated it myself. "I'll be there," I promised, suppressing a smile. This is one family meeting I wouldn't miss for the world. I retreated to my staff quarters to prepare for the 2 p.m. meeting. This moment, the revelation of my ownership, required careful consideration. I wasn't interested in a dramatic, vindictive unveiling designed to humiliate my family. That wasn't the point of this acquisition. But I did want the truth to have impact, to create the disruption necessary for real change. I changed into a sleek charcoal pantsuit, the only piece of designer clothing I'd brought, tailored perfectly to my frame. It was my armor for important business negotiations, conveying competence and authority without flashiness. I added my mother's simple pearl earrings, a reminder of what she had built and what I had preserved despite Theodore's mismanagement. At 1:45, I made my way to the main lobby where both events, Theodore's emergency family meeting and my ownership announcement, were scheduled to take place. The resort staff were already setting up a small podium and microphone under Harrington's direction. Nearby, my family was gathering in a private seating area, their expressions ranging from irritation to excitement at the drama unfolding. "There, you are?" Natalie called, eyeing my outfit with surprise. "Why are you so dressed up? It's just a family meeting." "I had a business call scheduled for later," I lied smoothly. "Thought I'd be prepared." "Business on a family weekend?" she scoffed. "Seriously, Morgan, it's like you're trying to be excluded sometimes." I let the comment slide, settling into a chair at the periphery of the group. Theodore was at the center, naturally, holding court with his theories about the mysterious buyer. "It has to be the Wainwright Group," he was saying confidently. "They've been trying to establish a foothold in this region for years." "Why all the secrecy, though?" Blake's wife Stephanie asked. "If it's a legitimate business acquisition, why hide behind anonymous LLCs? Tax purposes, most likely," Theodore declared with the confidence of someone who had once read a Wall Street Journal article about corporate taxation. Or perhaps they didn't want to alert other potential investors and drive up the price. Hid a smile. The anonymity had nothing to do with taxation and everything to do with preventing exactly this kind of speculation before I was ready to reveal myself. As the family discussion continued, I noticed James Harrington approaching. He nodded politely to the group before addressing me directly. "Ms. Blackwood, may I speak with you privately for a moment?" All conversation ceased as my relatives stared in confusion. Why would the resort manager need to speak with the family? Underachiever? "Of course," I replied, rising to follow him a short distance away. Once out of earshot, Harrington spoke quietly. "I've just been informed that you're the representative designated to make the announcement on behalf of the new ownership. Is that correct?" Eleanor had done her job well, maintaining the veil of secrecy until the last possible moment. "That's correct," I confirmed. "I'll be making the announcement at 2 p.m. as planned." His eyes widened slightly, professional reserve momentarily slipping. "I see, that's unexpected. Your family seems quite invested in this matter." "They are," I agreed, "which is why I'd appreciate it if you could ensure they remain here for the announcement. It concerns them directly." He studied me with new interest. "May I ask what your relationship is to the new owner?" I allowed myself a small smile. "That will be made clear during the announcement, Mr. Harrington." He nodded, accepting the non-answer. "Very well. We're set to begin in 10 minutes. The podium is prepared whenever you're ready." As he walked away, I turned to find my family watching me intently. "What was that about?" Theodore demanded. "Why is Harrington speaking to you about resort business?" "We'll all find out shortly," I replied, glancing at my watch. "It appears there's going to be an announcement about the new ownership at 2 p.m. "How? Do you know that?" Aunt Vivian asked suspiciously. I shrugged. "Harrington just mentioned it." Theodore frowned. "Well, this is convenient timing. Perhaps we'll learn who this mysterious buyer is and can approach them directly about our investment interest." At precisely 2 p.m., the lobby began to fill with resort staff and curious guests. Harrington stepped up to the podium, tapping the microphone to get everyone's attention. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us for this special announcement. As some of you may have heard, Willowbrook Resort has recently undergone a change in ownership. I'd like to introduce the representative of the new ownership group, who will share some information about the transition and future plans for the property." He gestured toward me, and I rose from my seat. The confused murmurs from my family were, audible as I walked confidently to the podium. From the corner of my eye, I could see Theodore's face contorted in confusion. Natalie was whispering frantically to her husband. Aunt Vivian looked as though she'd bitten into something sour. I took my place at the podium, adjusted the microphone, and faced the assembled crowd. Thank you, Mr. Harrington. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Morgan Blackwood, and I'm pleased to announce that as of 11 a.m. this morning, I am the new owner of Willowbrook Resort. The silence that followed was absolute, a perfect vacuum of stunned disbelief. Then came the cascade of reactions, gasps from the staff, polite applause from the uninvolved guests, and most satisfyingly, the slack-jawed shock on my relatives' faces. This acquisition represents the beginning of an exciting new chapter for Willowbrook, I continued, my voice steady and professional. I believe in this property's potential and am committed to investing in its future, its facilities, and most importantly, its people. I outlined a brief vision for the resort: improved staff accommodations, updated technology, renovated guest facilities, and a renewed commitment to exceptional service. As I spoke, I could see the staff's expressions shifting from surprise to cautious optimism. Lucia, standing near the back, was grinning broadly. Chef Vega nodded thoughtfully at my mention of kitchen upgrades. I want to assure all guests, I said, looking directly at my family, that this transition will not disrupt any current stays. All existing reservations and arrangements will be honored, including group bookings like family reunions. Throughout my speech, I maintained my professional demeanor, never once acknowledging the personal significance of this moment or the family drama unfolding in the front row. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my narrative. In closing, I look forward to working with the exceptional team here at Willowbrook to create memorable experiences for all our guests. Mr. Harrington will continue as general manager, ensuring a smooth transition. Thank you for your attention. I'll be available to answer questions individually after this announcement. As I stepped away from the podium, applause filled the lobby, enthusiastic from the staff, polite from the other guests, and completely absent from my shell-shocked family. Theodore looked as though he'd been struck by lightning. Aunt Vivian was frantically whispering to anyone who would listen. My cousins stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. James Harrington approached, extending his hand. Congratulations. Ms. Blackwood? Or should I say, Ms. Blackwood? I smiled, shaking his hand. Morgan is fine, Mr. Harrington. I look forward to working with you. As do I, he replied, a new respect evident in his eyes. I have many ideas to discuss when you're ready. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. in your office? I suggested. I'll be prepared, he promised, before turning to manage the dispersing crowd. The moment of truth had arrived. My family remained frozen in their seats, watching me with expressions ranging from disbelief to calculation. It was time to face them, not as the family afterthought, but as Morgan Blackwood, owner of Willowbrook Resort. As the crowd dispersed, I made my way toward my family, who remained frozen in their cluster of expensive resort wear and stunned expressions. Uncle Theodore was the first to recover, rising to his feet with the practiced smile he reserved for damage control. Morgan, he boomed, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. What a wonderful surprise. You should have told us about your plans. The family would have supported you completely. His swift pivot from shock to pretending he'd been in my corner all along was exactly what I'd expected. Theodore built his self-image on being the successful patriarch who controlled all family business ventures. He couldn't publicly acknowledge being blindsided. It all happened rather quickly, I replied, matching his public-facing tone while, holding his gaze steadily, Aunt Vivian joined the performance, air-kissing my cheek. Darling, we're all so proud. Though I'm a bit hurt you kept such exciting news from us. Family shouldn't have secrets. The irony of her statement wasn't lost on me, considering how many family decisions had been made without my input over the years. If everyone is finished with their lunch, I said pleasantly, perhaps we could continue this conversation somewhere more private. Theodore nodded eagerly. Excellent idea. The lakeside room should be empty now. As our group made its way toward the private meeting space, I could feel the tension building. The smiles remained plastered on for the benefit of other guests, but the rigid shoulders and tight jawlines told the true story. Once the door closed behind us in the wood-paneled lakeside room, the facades dropped instantly. What the hell was that? Theodore demanded, his face flushing deep red. $28 million? Where did you get that kind of money? Aunt Vivian sank into a chair, fanning herself dramatically. I feel faint. This doesn't make any sense. My cousins hovered uncertainty, caught between shock and rapidly recalculating their relationship with me in light of this development. I remained standing, hands clasped calmly in front of me. I've been building my investment portfolio for 15 years. Willowbrook represents a significant opportunity for capital growth with the right management approach. But you're a consultant, Blake stammered. You help small businesses with whatever it is you do. I'm a business strategist, I corrected gently. And yes, I consult with companies on operational efficiency and growth potential. I also invest in promising ventures when I identify them. Theodore paced the room, his body practically vibrating with frustrated energy. This is impossible. You can't have that kind of capital. Your mother left you some money, certainly, but nothing approaching this level. The mention of my mother was deliberate, a reminder that whatever I had accomplished began with her legacy. It was typical Theodore, subtly undermining my achievement. My mother taught me well, I acknowledged. She believed in reinvesting profits and taking calculated risks. I've followed her example successfully. And you never thought to include your family in this opportunity? Theodore challenged. After everything we've done for you? The audacity of his question caught me off guard. After everything they'd done for me? Like relegating me to staff quarters? Assigning me serving duty at a family gathering? Consistently treating me as less valuable than my cousins? What exactly have you done for me, Uncle Theodore? I asked quietly. He blinked, unprepared for the direct question. We've always included you in family matters. Keep you connected to the Blackwood name and legacy. Connected to the Blackwood name, I repeated, but not included in the Blackwood privileges, not considered for the Blackwood opportunities you've created for Blake and Natalie. That's different, he blustered. They're your children, I finished for him. Yes, I'm aware. And I'm just your niece, the daughter of your sister who built the company you've been running into the ground for the past decade. A shocked silence fell over the room. I had never spoken so bluntly before, had never named the dynamics so explicitly. How dare you? Aunt Vivian whispered. After we took you in? Took me in? I laughed softly, genuinely amused by the rewriting of history. I was never taken in, Vivian. I had my own home, my own life. What you did was tolerate my presence at family gatherings while making it abundantly clear I was an outsider. Natalie, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke up. You're being dramatic, Morgan. No one excluded you. You excluded yourself with your constant focus on work and your peculiar lifestyle choices. My peculiar lifestyle choices, I echoed. You mean building financial independence instead of marrying for status and security? Her cheeks flushed. That's unfair. I love Derek. I'm sure you do, I said sincerely. Just as I'm sure you love being a mother to your children. My point is that you've always had the freedom to make those choices without judgment or consequence. I've never been afforded the same consideration. Theodore, recovering from the shock of my confrontation, went on the offensive. If you felt so mistreated, why didn't you say something? Why this elaborate scheme to buy the resort without telling us? It was a fair question, though asked unfairly. I took a moment to consider my response. I've tried having these conversations before, I said finally. Every attempt was dismissed as oversensitivity or ingratitude. This wasn't an elaborate scheme, Theodore. It was a business opportunity that aligned with my investment strategy. The fact that it coincided with the family reunion was merely convenient timing. Convenient, he scoffed. You deliberately humiliated me in front of the entire family. I told everyone about my plans to invest in this property. Plans you never shared with me, I pointed out. Just as you never shared your plans when you took over my mother's company, or when you reorganized the family trust to benefit your children. Disproportionately. His face paled slightly. How do you know about trust? I make it my business to know where my interests are concerned, I replied simply. Just as I now make it my business to know everything about this resort. Blake, ever. His father's son saw an angle to exploit. So what happens now? Do we all get kicked out of the resort? I turned to him, keeping my expression neutral. Of course not. As I said in the announcement, all current reservations will be honored. The Blackwood family reunion will continue exactly as planned through the weekend. Relief visibly washed over several faces, quickly replaced by calculation. And after the weekend? Theodore pressed. What then? Are we still welcome at Willowbrook? The question carried more weight than its surface meaning. He was really asking if I planned to use my new position to exclude them as they had excluded me, if this was the beginning of retribution. Willowbrook welcomes all guests who treat the property and staff with respect, I said carefully. The Blackwood family included, though I should mention that the staff quarters will no longer be offered as guest accommodations. Even for my family, the pointed reminder of how they'd treated me hung in the air between us. This isn't over, Morgan, Theodore said, his voice low and tense. You may own this property, but you can't buy your way into... Into what? I interrupted. Family acceptance? You're right, I can't. Nor do I want to anymore. I stopped seeking your approval years ago, Theodore. I just never stopped hoping you might see me clearly someday. For a moment, something flickered. In his eyes. Perhaps recognition. Perhaps regret. But it was quickly shuttered behind his familiar mask of authority. We'll discuss this further when tempers have cooled, he announced, as if he still had the power to dictate terms. The family. We'll reconvene after dinner. Without waiting for my response, he strode from the room, Vivian hurrying after him. My cousins lingered awkwardly, clearly unsure where they now stood with either Theodore or me. Natalie approached cautiously. Morgan, I never realized you felt so excluded. Her tentative olive branch might have moved me once. Now I recognized it for what it was, a tactical adjustment to changed circumstances rather than genuine empathy. I know, I said simply. That's rather the point. As they filtered out of the room, I remained behind, letting the confrontation settle around me. It hadn't gone exactly as I'd imagined, but it had accomplished what was necessary. For the first time, I had named the family dynamics openly and honestly, without cushioning my truth to protect their feelings. I wasn't naive enough to think one conversation would change ingrained patterns of behavior. But it was a start, the beginning of a new chapter, where I would no longer contort myself to fit the narrow space they'd allocated for me in the family portrait. After the confrontation with my family, I needed space to breathe. I made my way to the lakefront, finding a secluded bench beneath a weeping willow. The water lapped gently at the shore, a soothing rhythm that helped calm my racing thoughts. I had imagined this moment for weeks. The revelation, the confrontation, the shift in power dynamics. The reality had been both more and less dramatic than I'd anticipated. More in the raw emotion that had surfaced, less in the immediate impact on my family's behavior. They were still processing, adjusting their strategies rather than truly reflecting on the patterns I'd named. My phone buzzed with texts and emails, most related to the acquisition. I ignored them for now, allowing myself a rare moment of stillness. The weight of years, of being overlooked, underestimated, and marginalized within my own family, seemed to press on me differently now. Not lighter exactly, but more evenly, distributed, as if I was finally strong enough to carry it without bending. Mind if I join you? I looked up to find my younger cousin Zoe standing a few feet away. At 26, she was the youngest of Theodore's nieces and nephews, the daughter of his younger brother who had moved abroad years ago. Zoe visited the States rarely, making her attendance at this reunion unusual. Please, I gestured to the space beside me. She sat, tucking her legs beneath her in a casual pose that contrasted with the careful way most of the family carried themselves. Zoe had always been different, more artistic, less concerned with the Blackwood legacy of wealth and status. I'd always felt a kinship with her, though our interactions had been limited by geography and circumstance. That was quite a show there, she said after a moment of companionable silence. Not my intention, I admitted. I didn't buy Willowbrook to create drama. No? She raised an eyebrow. Not even a little bit? I laughed softly, appreciating her directness. Maybe a little bit, but mostly it was a sound business decision. The resort has potential that the previous owners weren't developing. She nodded, watching a heron glide low over the water. Uncle Theodore looked like he was going to have an aneurysm. It was magnificent. Zoe, I chided, though I couldn't suppress a smile. What? He deserved it. She turned to face me fully. You know, I've always wondered why you put up with it. The way they treat you. The question caught me off guard with its bluntness. Family is complicated. It doesn't have to be this complicated, she countered. My dad figured that out. That's why he moved to Barcelona. I considered this. My uncle Jacob had indeed escaped the family dynamics by putting an ocean between himself and Theodore. It had worked for him, but it hadn't been my path. I didn't. Want to leave? I said finally. This is my home too, and there were things I needed to protect. Like your mom's company, Zoe said, surprising me again. You know about that? She nodded. Dad told me. He said Aunt Catherine built something amazing, and Theodore nearly destroyed it after she died. He also said someone mysterious stepped in to save it, though he never knew who. She studied me with new understanding. That was you, wasn't it? I hesitated, then nodded. I'd never discussed my behind-the-scenes role at Catherine Blackwood Designs with anyone in the family. How did you manage that without Theodore knowing? Shell companies, proxy investors, carefully placed board members, I explained. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. That company was my mother's legacy. I couldn't let him run it into the ground with his get-rich-quick strategies. Zoe whistled low. You've been playing chess while they thought you were playing checkers. Something like that, I agreed. She was quiet for a moment, then asked, What about the trust? Dad mentioned something about Theodore rearranging things after Grandpa died. The family trust was restructured to benefit Theodore's direct line. Disproportionately, I confirmed. It wasn't illegal. He had the authority as trustee. But it wasn't what our grandfather intended. And you just accepted that? I smiled enigmatically. I focused on building my own wealth rather than fighting over the trust. It seemed more productive. And now you own a multi-million-dollar resort while Uncle Theodore is having a meltdown. In the executive suite? Zoe grinned. I'd say your strategy worked out. We lapsed into comfortable silence, watching the lake shimmer in the afternoon sun. After a while, Zoe spoke again, her tone more serious. For what it's worth, I think you did the right thing. Standing up to them, I mean. Someone had to break the pattern. Her words touched me more deeply than I expected. Thank you. Dad will be sorry he missed it, she added. He always said you were the only one who inherited Aunt Catherine's business. Sense. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text from Lucia. The family patriarch is storming around the lobby looking for you. Just FYI. I sighed, showing the message to Zoe. Round 2? She asked. Apparently. She stood, offering me her hand. Want reinforcements? I make an excellent human shield. I laughed, accepting her help up from the bench. I appreciate the offer, but this is something I need to handle myself. Fair enough. She squeezed my shoulder. But if you need an ally there, look for me. Some of us have always seen you clearly, Morgan, even if we were too far away to say so. As Zoe walked back toward the main building, I felt a surprising lightness in my chest. I had been so focused on Theodore and his immediate family that I'd overlooked potential allies within the extended Blackwood clan. Jacob had escaped the toxic dynamics, but his daughter had returned with clear eyes and an uncompromising perspective. Perhaps there were others who saw the truth as well. My phone buzzed again, this time with a message from James Harrington. The management team would like to formally welcome you when you're available. We're gathered in the executive conference room. Perfect timing. Before facing Theodore again, I could connect with the team that would help transform Willowbrook into the resort it could become. I texted back my acceptance and headed toward the main building by a side entrance, deliberately avoiding the lobby where Theodore was apparently lying in wait. As I walked, I found myself reimagining the family dynamics not as a binary, Theodore's inner circle versus me, but as a spectrum of relationships that could potentially be realigned now that the power balance had shifted. Zoe was clearly an ally. Young Tyler had shown a genuine curiosity about my work. Even Natalie had seemed momentarily receptive to reconsidering our relationship. For the first time, I allowed myself to hope that this weekend might lead to more than just a dramatic confrontation. It might be the catalyst for authentic change, not just in how my family saw me, but in how we related to each other. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. With renewed purpose, I entered the resort building, ready to meet my management team and begin the real work of transformation, both for Willowbrook and, perhaps, for the Blackwood family itself. The executive conference room was a handsome space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake and mountains beyond. As I entered, the management team, about a dozen people, rose from their seats. James Harrington stepped forward to make introductions. Ms. Blackwood, welcome. Allow me to introduce the senior leadership of Willowbrook. I shook hands with each department head, Olivia Chen, Director of Guest Services, Marcus Washington, Facilities Manager, Chef Eduardo Vega, whom I'd already met, Sandra Willis, Director of Events, and several others whose names and faces I committed to memory. These were the people who kept Willowbrook running despite absentee ownership and underinvestment. These were now my people. Thank you all for coming, I said, taking a seat at the head of the table, a position that felt both foreign and right. I know this transition must feel sudden. We're accustomed to sudden changes, Olivia remarked with a wry smile, though usually they involve budget cuts, not new ownership. A ripple of knowing laughter spread through the group, the kind of gallows humor common among staff who've weathered difficult management. Well, I'm pleased to tell you that my first action as owner won't be budget cuts, I assured them. Quite the opposite. I believe Willowbrook has been operating below its potential for too long. I outlined my preliminary vision for the resort, priorities. I'd developed during my due diligence process, but was now eager to refine with input from the people who knew the operation best. Before I make any significant changes, I want to hear from each of you, I explained. What's working well? What needs immediate attention? If resources were no longer a constraint, what would you prioritize? The surprise on their faces was evident. These were people accustomed to implementing decisions from above, not contributing to the decision-making process. After a brief hesitation, Marcus Washington, the facilities manager, spoke up. The heating system in the West Wing needs a complete overhaul. We've been patching it together for 3 winters, but it's inefficient and unreliable. The reservation system crashes weekly, Olivia added. We lose bookings and guest data every time. Once the ice was broken, suggestions flowed freely. Chef Vega needed kitchen equipment upgrades. Sandra Willis wanted to renovate the ballroom to attract higher-end weddings and events. Each department had urgent needs that had been deprioritized by owners focused solely on short-term profit extraction. I listened carefully, taking notes and asking clarifying questions. These weren't frivolous requests. They were necessary investments to make the resort functional and competitive. The previous owners had been taking without giving back, a pattern that felt uncomfortably familiar. Thank you all for your candor, I said when they had finished. I can't promise that every issue will be addressed immediately, but I can promise that we'll create a strategic investment plan together. Willowbrook deserves better than it's received. The relief in the room was palpable. These were dedicated professionals who cared about their work but had been hamstrung by ownership that didn't share their commitment. There's something else I'd like to discuss, I continued. The staff accommodations. James Harrington shifted uncomfortably. Yes, they're admittedly below standard. The previous owners didn't see staff housing as a priority. I spent last night in the staff quarters, I told them. It was educational. Surprise registered on several faces. My family assigned me to the staff wing, I explained, allowing myself a small smile. They didn't consider me important enough for a guest suite. The awkward silence that followed was broken by Chef Vega's hearty laugh. No wonder you were so good at arranging pastries this morning. I thought you were surprisingly skilled for a guest. My hidden talents, I agreed, appreciating his ability to lighten the moment. In any case, the staff accommodations will be our first major renovation project. The people who make Willowbrook function deserve decent living conditions. The mood in the room shifted subtly. I could sense their recalibration, their reassessment of who I was and what my ownership might mean for them. As the meeting concluded, each department head promised to send detailed proposals for their most urgent needs. We agreed to reconvene in a week for a more structured planning session. James Harrington walked me out. That was unexpected, he admitted. Most owners I've worked with start by looking for ways to cut costs, not increase investment. I'm not most owners, I replied simply. Willowbrook is a long-term investment for me, not a short-term profit vehicle. He nodded thoughtfully. Your family seemed quite shocked by the announcement earlier. They were, I confirmed, not elaborating. Further, if you don't mind my asking, he said carefully, why did they put you in staff quarters? It seems unusual. I considered how much to share with this man who was now a key part of my management team. Transparency seemed the wisest approach. My family has always seen me as auxiliary, I explained. The unmarried, childless woman whose primary value is in supporting others rather than having inherent worth of her own. Assigning me to staff, quarters and kitchen duty was perfectly aligned with that perception. Understanding dawned in his eyes. And now you own the resort where they're staying. Life has a certain poetry sometimes, I agreed. Before he could respond, we rounded a corner and nearly collided with my Uncle Theodore, who was clearly lying in wait. There you are, he boomed, his false joviality strained at the edges. We've been looking everywhere for you, Morgan. James Harrington straightened, his demeanor shifting smoothly into professional mode. Mr. Blackwood, how can we help you? This is a family matter, Theodore said dismissively. Morgan and I need to speak. Privately. Mr. Harrington and I were discussing resort business, I replied calmly. Perhaps we could speak later, Uncle Theodore. Theodore's face flushed. He wasn't accustomed to being deprioritized, especially not in favor of someone he considered a service provider. This can't wait, he insisted. The family is gathered in the Maple Suite. We need to discuss how to proceed given these unusual circumstances. Translation. He had regrouped and strategized with his inner circle, and now they were ready to present a unified front. I turned to James. "Would you excuse us? We'll continue our discussion tomorrow morning." "Of course, Ms. Blackwood," he replied, the formality of his address a subtle reminder to Theodore of the new power dynamic. "I'll have those reports ready for your review as—" He walked away. Theodore's expression darkened. "Ms. Blackwood, already lording your new position over the staff?" "Actually, I've asked everyone to call me Morgan," I corrected him. Mr. Harrington was being respectful in front of a guest. "I'm not just a guest," Theodore snapped. "I'm your uncle and the head of this family." The statement hung in the air between us, a perfect distillation of the entitlement I had decided to no longer accommodate. "You're the head of your immediate family," I acknowledged. "But I'm an adult, Theodore. I haven't needed a family head to make decisions for me in a very long time." His jaw tightened. "We'll discuss this further in private. The family is waiting." As I followed him toward the maple suite, I steeled myself for round 2 of the Blackwood family drama. But something had changed, not just in how they saw me, but in how I saw myself. The meeting with the management team had reminded me that this acquisition wasn't merely about confronting family dynamics. It was about creating something meaningful, about transformation and growth. Whatever awaited me in the maple suite, I would face it not as the overlooked niece seeking validation, but as Morgan Blackwood, owner of Willowbrook Resort and architect of her own destiny. The Maple Suite was one of Willowbrook's premium accommodations, a sprawling space with a private terrace overlooking the mountains. As Theodore ushered me inside, I was met with the sight of my assembled family, arranged like a tribunal awaiting a defendant. Aunt Vivian occupied the central armchair, flanked by my cousins on the sectional sofa. Even the children had been banished elsewhere, making this officially adult business. Interestingly, Zoe was present, perched on a windowsill slightly apart from the others. She caught my eye and gave me an almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. "Morgan, thank you for joining us," Aunt Vivian began, as if I'd been invited rather than summoned. "We've been having a family discussion about this unexpected development." "I gathered as much," I replied, choosing to remain standing rather than take the conspicuously empty seat they'd left for me. Directly across from Theodore, the position of someone being interviewed or evaluated. Theodore cleared his throat, assuming his boardroom posture. "After careful consideration, we believe there's an opportunity here that could benefit the entire family." Of course, they had moved from shock to calculation, already plotting how to extract advantage from the situation. It was exactly what I had anticipated. "I'm listening," I said neutrally. "It seems clear that you've been quiet, successful in your investments," Theodore continued, the admission visibly paining him. "More successful than any of us realized." Natalie nodded vigorously. "We had no idea you had built such substantial wealth, Morgan. You've been so modest about your accomplishments." The revisionist history was beginning already. My modesty had actually been their complete disinterest in my career, but that narrative was being hastily rewritten. "In light of your obvious business acumen," Theodore pressed on, "we think it makes perfect sense to formally bring you into the family business ventures, a partnership, if you will." "What kind of partnership?" I asked, curious to see how they had reframed their relationship, to me now that I held something they wanted. "We're proposing a Blackwood family investment group," he explained, warming to his topic. "Pooling our resources and expertise for mutual benefit. You would have a seat at the table, a significant one, of course, given your recent demonstration of financial capacity." There it was, the attempt to absorb my success into the family structure, to place it under Theodore's ultimate control while appearing to offer me the validation I had supposedly been seeking all along. And who would lead this investment group? I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Well, as the senior member with the most extensive business experience, I would naturally serve as chairman," Theodore replied, as if this were self-evident. But you would have a prominent role, Morgan. Vice chairperson, perhaps. I suppressed a smile. Even now, with irrefutable evidence of my business capabilities literally surrounding us, Theodore couldn't conceive of a reality where he wasn't in charge. That's an interesting proposal, I said carefully. What specific value would the family bring to this partnership? The question caught him off guard. Value? Well, the Blackwood name for one. Connections, relationships, social capital. And capital itself? I pressed. What financial investment would each family member contribute? An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. In their hastily concocted plan, they had envisioned leveraging my wealth while contributing primarily their expertise and connections. Blake finally spoke up. We'd all contribute proportionally, of course. I could liquidate some assets for initial investment. As could I, Natalie added quickly, though the strain in her voice suggested this wasn't a comfortable proposition for her. I nodded thoughtfully, taking a moment to study each face in the room. They were trying to adapt to the new reality, one where I had resources they suddenly wanted access to, without fundamentally changing their perception of me or the family hierarchy. I appreciate the offer, I said finally, but I'm comfortable with my current investment strategy. Theodore's confident expression faltered. You're declining? After complaining for years about being excluded from family opportunities? I wasn't complaining, Theodore. I was stating facts, I corrected gently. And I'm not declining out of spite. I'm declining because it doesn't make business sense for me. Doesn't that make business sense? He repeated incredulously. Combining our resources and expertise is the definition of good business sense. I shook my head. Not when the partnership is fundamentally imbalanced. You're proposing that I contribute significant capital while you contribute. What exactly? A family. Name I already possess? Business expertise that led to the near collapse of my mother's company? The pointed reference to his mismanagement hit its mark. Theodore's face flushed dark red. That's uncalled for, Aunt Vivian interjected. Your uncle saved that company when your mother passed. Is that what he told you? I asked, keeping my tone even. Because the financial records tell a different story. Within 2 years of taking control, Theodore had reduced profits by 60%. Within 3, he had laid off half the design team that made Catherine Blackwood Designs unique in the marketplace. Theodore rose to his feet, fists clenched at his sides. You have no idea what you're talking about. You were a grieving girl who couldn't possibly understand the business decisions that needed to be made. I was 28, Theodore. Hardly a child, I reminded him, and I understood enough to quietly acquire controlling interest in the company and reverse your worst decisions before you completely destroyed my mother's legacy. A stunned silence fell over the room. This revelation, that I had been the anonymous investor who had gradually wrested control of Catherine Blackwood Designs from Theodore, was clearly news to everyone except perhaps Zoe, who was watching the exchange with barely concealed satisfaction. That's impossible, Theodore finally sputtered. I would have known. I'm the chairman of the board. You're a figurehead, I corrected him. The board follows my direction through intermediaries, has done for years. Natalie looked between her father and me, confusion evident on her face. Wait, are you saying you've secretly owned Mom's company all this time? While letting Dad think he was in charge? Not entirely owned, I clarified. But controlling interest, yes. It seemed the simplest solution. Theodore got to maintain his public role as company chairman, while the business was actually guided by people who understood my mother's vision. This is outrageous, Theodore declared, though his bluster lacked conviction. It's corporate espionage. It's business, I countered. And it was necessary to preserve what my mother built, just as purchasing Willowbrook was a business decision, not a personal statement, Blake scoffed. You expect us to believe you bought this resort with no thought to how it would affect the family? Come on, Morgan. Nobody's that detached. I considered his question seriously. I won't pretend I didn't appreciate the timing, but I didn't buy Willowbrook to make a point or to humiliate anyone. I bought it because it's a sound investment with significant potential for appreciation under the right management. From her, perched by the window, Zoe finally spoke. I believe her. Not everything is about this family, despite what some of you seem to think. Theodore shot her a withering glance. You've been here 5 minutes, Zoe. You don't understand the dynamics at play. Maybe that gives me a clearer perspective, she countered. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like Morgan made smart business moves that benefited both her mother's legacy and her own portfolio, while the rest of you were too busy assuming she had nothing to offer. The tension in the maple suite was palpable. Theodore remained standing, his authority visibly crumbling as years of carefully maintained family mythology collapsed around him. The revelation about Catherine Blackwood Designs had clearly shocked everyone. Not just the fact that I had quietly outmaneuvered Theodore, but that I had been capable of doing so without any of them noticing. This changes nothing, Theodore finally declared, though his voice lacked conviction. The family investment group is still the most sensible path forward. For whom? I asked quietly. The simple question hung in the air. For years, family decisions had benefited Theodore's immediate circle while marginalizing others. The proposal to incorporate my resources into a structure he controlled was merely a continuation of that pattern. Unexpectedly, it was Blake's wife Stephanie who broke the uncomfortable silence. Perhaps we should consider a different approach. All eyes turned to her with surprise. Stephanie had always been a peripheral figure in family discussions, deferring to Blake, who in turn deferred to Theodore. What kind of approach? Aunt Vivian asked warily. Stephanie straightened, seeming to gather courage. Maybe instead of trying to fold Morgan's success into existing family structures, we should be asking what we can learn from her. She's clearly built something substantial on her own terms. The suggestion that they might learn from me rather than simply absorb my achievements was revolutionary in this context. A subtle shift rippled through the room. Confusion, consideration, and in Theodore's case, visible resistance. That's ridiculous, he scoffed. Morgan has been fortunate in some investments, certainly, but the idea that she has expertise the rest of us lack is demonstrably true, Natalie interrupted, surprising everyone, including herself. She flushed as attention turned to her, but continued. Dad, be reasonable. Morgan bought a $28 million resort without any of us having a clue she had that kind of capital. And apparently she's been running Mom's company for years while letting you believe you were in charge. She turned to me with newfound respect. That's kind of badass, Morgan. The unexpected compliment from my typically dismissive cousin left me momentarily speechless. Theodore looked as though he'd bitten into something sour. Let's stay focused, he insisted. The point is to determine how we move forward as a family given these new circumstances. I think that's exactly what we're discussing, Zoe countered. The circumstances being that Morgan has been systematically underestimated and sidelined despite clearly possessing exceptional business acumen. Theodore's patience visibly frayed. Enough. This isn't about Morgan's feelings or past grievances. This is about practical next steps. He turned to me, attempting to reassert control. Morgan, regardless of how we got here, we need to address the immediate situation. The family is gathered at a resort you now apparently own. What do you intend to do about that? The question carried unspoken fears. Was I planning to evict them? To publicly humiliate them? To exact some form of revenge for years of dismissal? As I said earlier, nothing changes for this weekend, I assured him. The family reunion will continue as planned. You're all welcome guests at Willowbrook. Relief flickered across several faces, though Theodore remained suspicious. And after this weekend? Willowbrook welcomes all guests who respect the property and staff. I repeated my earlier statement. My ownership doesn't change your ability to visit in the future, though I'd suggest making reservations well in advance. We'll be implementing some changes that I expect will make the resort quite popular. And the family business ventures? Theodore pressed. Catherine Blackwood Designs? The trust arrangements? Do you plan to continue your behind-the-scenes manipulations? The accusatory tone might have intimidated me once. Now, it merely highlighted how thoroughly Theodore was missing the point. I plan to continue making sound business decisions, I replied evenly. The company will proceed under its current management structure, which has restored it to profitability. As for the trust, that's a separate conversation that can wait for another day. Theodore opened his mouth to protest further, but Aunt Vivian placed a restraining hand on his arm. I think we all need time to process these developments, she said, her social instincts finally overriding her loyalty to Theodore's position. Perhaps we should reconvene for dinner as planned and continue discussions tomorrow when emotions aren't so heightened. It was a graceful exit strategy, offering everyone a chance to save face and regroup. Even Theodore recognized the wisdom of retreat, though he clearly didn't like it. Fine, he conceded. Dinner at 7, as scheduled. In the meantime, I suggest everyone consider what's truly best for the family moving forward. As the impromptu summit disbanded, family members filed out of the Maple Suite with varying expressions: confusion, resentment, curiosity, and in a few cases, a newfound respect when they glanced my way. Theodore left without another word, Vivian hurrying after him. Blake and his wife followed, deep in hushed conversation. Natalie lingered, uncharacteristically hesitant. Morgan, she began, then faltered. I never realized. That is, I always thought you were just the family spinster, I supplied, not unkindly. She had the grace to look embarrassed. Something like that. I'm starting to think I've been wrong about a lot of things. We all have our blind spots, Natalie. She nodded, seeming to struggle with unfamiliar humility. Maybe we could have coffee tomorrow. Just us? I'd like to hear more about what you've been building all these years. The olive branch was unexpected but not unwelcome. I'd like that, I agreed. After she left, only Zoe remained, grinning broadly. Well, that was better than any reality show I've ever seen. I couldn't help laughing. Not exactly how I planned to spend my weekend. Plans are overrated, she declared, hopping down from her windowsill perch. So what now, resort magnate? Going to redo the staff quarters in gold fixtures? Rename the place Morgan's Revenge? Nothing so dramatic, I assured her. Though I am going to improve the staff accommodations considerably. They deserve better than what they've had. Zoe studied me thoughtfully. You really did buy this place as a business investment, didn't you? Not just to stick it to Uncle Theodore. I really did, I confirmed, though I won't pretend the timing wasn't satisfying. She linked her arm through mine as we walked toward the door. You know what I think? I think Aunt Catherine would be incredibly proud of you. Not just for the business success, but for finally standing in your truth without apology. Her words touched something deep within me. The part that still, after all these years, wondered what my mother would think of the woman I had become. I hope so. I know so, Zoe insisted. Now, I believe you own a bar on the premises. How about you buy your favorite cousin a drink while you tell me exactly how you pulled off this corporate ninja move without anyone noticing? As we walked through the resort, my resort, I felt a curious sense of peace settling over me. The confrontation had been necessary, but it wasn't the end of the story. It was merely the beginning of a new chapter, one where I no longer contorted myself to fit into spaces too small for my abilities or my worth. Whatever came next with the family would unfold on different terms. Not because I demanded retribution for past slights, but because I had finally claimed my rightful place, not as the family afterthought, but as Morgan Blackwood, exactly as I was. Sunday morning arrived with a clarity that seemed fitting for the final day of the family reunion. I woke early in my staff quarters, a choice I'd maintained despite James Harrington's repeated offers to move me to the owner's suite. There was something symbolically important about finishing the weekend where I'd started it, a reminder of the journey taken. After a quick shower, I made my way to the kitchen where the breakfast preparations were already underway. Chef Vega looked up in surprise as I entered. "Ms. Morgan, you don't need to be here this morning. We've got everything under control." "I know you do," I assured him, "but I promised to help with the breakfast buffet, and I kept my promises." He studied me for a moment, then nodded with newfound respect. "In that case, Lucia could use some help with the fruit platters." Lucia grinned as I approached her station. "The boss lady returns. Didn't expect to see you back here after yesterday's." "Bombshell." "I'm a woman of my word," I replied, picking up a knife to assist with the melon preparation. "Besides, I find kitchen work surprisingly centering." We worked in companionable silence for a while, the rhythmic chopping and arranging creating a peaceful counterpoint to the emotional turbulence of the previous day. "So, what happens next?" Lucia finally asked. "With your family, I mean. They looked pretty shell-shocked yesterday." "They're adapting," I said thoughtfully. "Some more gracefully than others." "And you? How are you feeling about it all?" I considered her question seriously. "Relieved, mostly. It's exhausting to be constantly underestimated, to hide your capabilities, so others feel comfortable. Whatever happens next, at least it will be authentic." The breakfast service proceeded smoothly, though with a markedly different dynamic than before. My family arrived in small groups rather than their usual unified. Front Theodore and Vivian came first, subdued and watchful. Theodore nodded stiffly in my direction, but made no move to approach the buffet I was maintaining. Natalie and her husband appeared next, their children in tow. To my surprise, Natalie directed her family to my station. "Good morning, Morgan," she said, her usual brisk tone softened with uncertainty. "The fruit display looks lovely." "Thank you," I replied. "The berries are particularly good this morning." Tyler, her oldest, looked between us with the keen perception of children. "Mom said you own this whole place now. Is that true, Aunt Morgan?" "It is," I confirmed. "Cool." He grinned. "Does that mean we get free ice cream?" I couldn't help laughing. "The ice cream bar opens at noon. 1 serving per person, owner's family or not." He seemed satisfied with this answer and moved along the buffet. Natalie lingered. "We're still on for coffee later?" she asked tentatively. "Absolutely." "The Lakeside Cafe at 2?" She nodded, relief evident in her expression. "I'll be there." As breakfast service wound down, I spotted James Harrington entering the dining room, scanning the space until he found me. He approached with purpose, a leather portfolio tucked under his arm. "Good morning, Morgan. I have the preliminary reports. You requested for tomorrow's planning meeting." "Thank you, James. Let's review them in your office after the breakfast service concludes." He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "There's something else you should know. Your uncle, Mr. Blackwood, has requested a private meeting with me this morning. I believe he's exploring options to extend the family's stay beyond the original reservation." I nodded, unsurprised. Theodore would naturally try to assert some control over the situation by dealing directly with management rather than coming to me. "How did you respond?" "I told him that all special arrangements would need the owner's approval," James replied with the faintest hint of a smile. He didn't seem pleased. I imagine not. "Thank you for handling it professionally." After the breakfast shift ended, I changed into more business-appropriate attire for my meeting with James. As I exited the staff wing for what would likely be the last time, I nearly collided with my cousin Blake. "Morgan," he said, seeming flustered to find me emerging from what he still considered servants' quarters. I've been looking for you. Here I am, I replied simply. What can I do for you, Blake? He shifted uncomfortably. I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about sound business decisions and legitimate partnerships. I wondered if, that is, I was hoping we might discuss some potential collaboration. Not the family investment group Dad proposed, but something more. Equitable. His choice of words, equitable rather than equal, caught my attention. Perhaps Blake was more perceptive than I'd given him credit for. I'm open to hearing ideas, I said. Why don't you put together a proper proposal? Something with projections, risk analysis, and clear value propositions from both parties. He brightened visibly. I can do that. I've actually been working on some concepts I think have real potential, but Dad always says they're too experimental for Blackwood Investments. For a moment, I glimpsed a different Blake. Not the echo of Theodore I'd always perceived, but someone with his own suppressed ideas and ambitions. Send me the proposal when it's ready, I told him. I'll give it serious consideration. As the day progressed, I moved between worlds, meeting with James about operational improvements, having coffee with Natalie where we began the tentative process of redefining our relationship, and checking in with the staff who were still adjusting to the idea of an owner who had worked alongside them. By late afternoon, most of the family was preparing to depart. I found myself on the front portico, watching as luggage was loaded and goodbyes were exchanged. Zoe approached, her backpack slung casually over one shoulder. Quite a weekend, she observed. Not the usual Blackwood family drama. Decidedly, not, I agreed. Dad's going to be sorry he missed it. I've been texting him updates. Hope you don't mind. Not at all. I'd like to reconnect with Jacob. It's been too long. She nodded. He said the same thing. Also said he always knew you'd shake things up someday. She glanced toward where Theodore was supervising the loading of his expensive luggage into his Bentley. Think Uncle Theo will ever recover? Theodore adapts when necessary, I replied. His perception of me has been fundamentally altered, and that will require adjustment. But he's nothing if not practical. As if sensing our attention, Theodore looked our way. After a moment's hesitation, he approached, his expression carefully neutral. Morgan, the family will be departing shortly. I hope you've enjoyed your stay at Willowbrook, I replied with professional courtesy. He cleared his throat. It was illuminating. About tomorrow's board meeting for Catherine Blackwood Designs. Will you be attending in person now or continuing your remote management approach? The question was his way of testing boundaries, of determining how much our relationship had truly changed. I'll be there, I confirmed. It seems appropriate to make my role official, don't you think? He nodded stiffly. I'll have Marjorie update the agenda. He hesitated, then added, Your mother had good instincts about people and business. It appears you inherited both. Coming from Theodore, this oblique acknowledgement of my capabilities was the closest thing to an apology I was likely to receive. I accepted it as such. Thank you, Theodore. I'll see you tomorrow. As he walked away, Zoe whistled low. Was that Theodore Blackwood almost admitting he was wrong? Mark this day in history. I smiled, watching as the family cars began to depart one by one. Not wrong exactly, just not as right as he's always believed himself to be. The sun was setting over the mountains as the last of my relatives drove away, casting long shadows across the resort grounds. My resort grounds. I stood on the steps, feeling the weight and promise of this new chapter. James Harrington joined me, respectfully waiting until I acknowledged his presence. The staff would like to host a small reception this evening, he said, to properly welcome you as the new owner. Nothing elaborate, just a gesture of goodwill. The invitation touched me deeply. I'd be honored to attend. Excellent. 8 o'clock in the Lakeside Pavilion. He paused, then added, For what it's worth, the team is genuinely excited about the future under your ownership. you've already earned their respect." As he walked away, I remained on the portico, watching the golden light fade from the landscape. The weekend had unfolded in ways I couldn't have predicted, reshaping family dynamics that had seemed immutable for decades. I thought of my mother, how she had built something remarkable through vision and determination, how she had tried to instill those same qualities in me. For the first time, I felt certain that I had honored her legacy not just by preserving her company, but by finally claiming my own place in the world without apology or compromise. The family reunion had begun with me assigned to serve food, an afterthought in the family narrative. It ended with me as the owner of Willowbrook Resort, author of my own story, architect of my own future. As I turned to walk back into the resort, my resort, I felt a profound sense of alignment. The path forward wouldn't be without challenges, but it would be authentic. No more hiding in the shadows, no more accepting less than I deserved. For the first time in perhaps my entire adult life, I was exactly where I belonged. Exactly as I was, Morgan Blackwood, no longer defined by others' perceptions, but by the truth of who I had always been. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.